Welcome to the seventh in a series of online interviews with Richard Harvey, talking about the last lecture in the Panchavati Discourses. My name is Rob Meager, and today's interview will discuss the lecture, The Threshold of Transformation. This lecture was given online on May 8th, 2013. And it is available in written form in Dharma Sky, an ebook you can order at the Sacred Attention Therapy website at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/books. You can also listen to the full recording of many of these lectures at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/education. And now a little bit of background about Richard Harvey. He is a psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He's the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a three-stage model of human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and The Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all around the world, and his forthcoming book is entitled Your Sacred Calling. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Richard Harvey to the call. Good day.
Hi, Robert.
Good to be with you.
And you?
It's rather serendipitous and metaphorical, I think, that we're here talking today about the threshold of transformation on the eve of a new calendar year.
Yeah.
Being December 31st and all its significance for some, perhaps many people. This lecture, The Threshold of Transformation, at the beginning of the lecture, you recount a story, and if you need me to provide any details, let me know. But you recount a story of working with a client who had fallen into disillusionment. And you shared that in the healing journey with and for this client was to practice, quote, his original child's sense of wonder by going out into the forest and being with and in nature. And I don't know if you recall the story and the client and that transformational journey with this individual. The question is this way of going out into the forest and being in and with nature, is this way or the way for everyone who has fallen into disillusionment?
I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily, to generalize, say that I'm not sure that I would apply it as a schema, for everybody who's in despair or disillusionment or depression, but perhaps inherent in the question is the truth that to return to the state of innocence and wonder and receptivity to nature, to life, to wonder, which we associate with the time of innocence of childhood, is a pretty good place to start. I mean, I don't have it as a recipe, as a formula, I always throw that at someone who's in despair, but I mean, maybe it's not a bad one. It's certainly very effective, as I recall in that case, and it is isn't it what we do? I mean, I know you have your lovely garden there, and when I've spent my time here at the desk, this close up to concepts and writing and working with people via Skype and all of this, I mean, what I want to do is go out there on the mountain and look at the trees and not think and just feel the miracle of nature. So, which is marvelously replenishing. If it's 10 minutes or an hour and 10 minutes, it's enough. And you breathe out a little more and to come back. So I'm not sure as there's an absolute in reply to that question, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb, I think.
I know myself recently, I've been enjoying some lengthy walks along a river that's nearby to where I live. And I hadn't done it in a while. And it's amazing what I'm observing with myself in that being close to nature and walking along this flowing life stream. It really is a wonderful way to, as you said, stop the thinking and just be. You continue on with this clinical story of working with this this client to reveal that when you reach the fork in a road, from a spiritual transformation point of view, you have two choices. You can choose despair or re-engage with your sense of wonder. And my question is, are there only two choices to make? Or are there other options? And if there's only two choices, for you, you shared that it was either choosing despair or re-engaging with your sense of wonder. Is that analogous to choosing fear or love?
One of my old teachers, Roshi Kennett from the Soto Zen tradition, used to say that she felt that evil people were people who'd reached a high level of spirituality and at the moment of kensho, or enlightenment, took their negative path, so to speak. That there was a choice, really. And it's been said of Aleister Crowley, for example, similar thing, and I'm sure we can think of other examples. Hitler is another example that's been proposed, and I think that there's a lot of truth in it, in the sense that as you move out of the realm of the opposites, the relative world of space and time, which partakes in duality in all its appearances, you are traversing what I've called the threshold of transformation into the realm of unity. There's no longer, there may be for a little while as you make up time and as your eyes adjust to the brightness, as it were, but there is no longer this dichotomy or conflict or self and other, good and evil, day and night, and all of this kind of opposition. Therefore, that last encounter is extreme. It's the narrow edge. It's the very point of the. You've come to that narrow place where there's just nothing else. I've called it sometimes the original wound, for example, or it's a decisive point. It's a one-way ticket. I think for all of us in inner work, there is nothing comparable in the realms of personality and character than this point, because to proceed on is to relinquish all sense of victimhood or a sense of oneself as in any way being acted upon by life in any way that is anything other than totally beneficent and abundant and loving. So it seems to me that this is the final test in a way. And if at that point you choose power, or another word would be fear. If at that point you choose power, then you take that path. The other way, of course, is surrender.
Mm-hmm. 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 And if you choose the path of power, to use your word, or fear, that will lead you to the despair option that you chose about in that clinical story?
It is despairing, isn't it, really? Because you don't truly control, do you? No, it's just simply not real. And so it's something like perfectionism. It's endlessly frustrating. I mean, look at the escalation of violence and appalling atrocity in any given war of the last 100 years, where we have, on both sides usually tremendous aberrative acts towards the so-called enemy or the opposition that usually escalates, while the one who's suffering from fear or violence or power tries to assert some kind of control over a situation which cannot be controlled. You cannot control ultimately. You cannot even possess or control or take another person's life unless they give it to you. Mm-hmm. Of course you can literally, but there's many wonderful stories, for example, in the Second World War of people retaining their souls even while their life may have been given, or even finding the best of their hearts and souls while they were subject to tremendous atrocity. So this must be very frustrating from the psychopathic, the violent, controlling point of view. It's not real, it doesn't work. You can't truly possess another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As you move along in the lecture, there's at a point you speak of what brings us to this threshold of transformation, this point you referred to earlier. And I've asked this before in a previous interview, but I'm going to come back to it again. And can this threshold of transformation be passed through because of a loving experience? With a person, with an animal, with nature. And why or why not? Because the implication in the lecture was that we're brought towards this moment of this threshold, but we're brought to that point because of a rather dramatic experience in our life, a cathartic experience, a transformational experience, but often emanating from what might be thought of as negative energies or dark forces, or what might be seen as not so positive experience in our life. Can we also be brought to that point through a loving experience in our life?
Well, I think the point about the threshold of transformation that we should definitely make is that you take nothing with you. If this were a painting, this is a naked person holding nothing at all, who in a sense lets go even of who he or she may think they are. So regardless of the experience being positive or negative or some kind of crisis or even a loving experience, you would have to let go of your attachment to it either way to broach the threshold. This threshold is not a Carlos Castaneda kind of throwing yourself into a misty valley or something, but that's a metaphor for it. It's a similar metaphor. You let go of everything, so your attachment has to go. Any sense of who you are, and maybe on the other side of the crossing, of the transition, that's up for grabs. You don't know, because you will stand in a different relationship to it. And if that's not the case, then it's not what here I'm defining as the threshold. What has happened is, through usually years, because months just isn't going to do it, the years of inner work, process of self-discovery, you dismantle the personality and the character to reveal the soul or the psyche of the essence of this body of awareness, whatever that is. And that's been relinquished surprisingly early, maybe days, weeks, months into life itself, this individual lifetime. And having returned to that in its essential formlessness, though essence, but nonetheless formless, you see, and therefore not definable, you cross the threshold out of surrender to the development of that for the first time. Your character and your personality are strictly secondary. They're of no consequence in and of themselves, as they have been for the life up to that point. So really, regardless of loving experience or a hateful experience or any kind of experience, the point would be you let go of your clinging or any attachment to that experience, or any experience for that matter. That's the point at where the threshold appears. That's the time when you can go, and that's when the therapist and the guide, and you're not going to be there without the therapist guide, lets go. I mean, this is etheric, it's, you know, it's energetic, it's real. It's not literal, but he lets go the hand, she lets go the hand. And you pass over the threshold. Only at that point, though, if there's even a crumb, if there's, what is it, you know, a little thread of cotton, the finest mesh of even a cobweb or something, you know, you don't go.
We have to let go of all the attachments, as you said, all the vestiges of what we thought about ourselves in the past. I've heard the analogy used that if a large ocean liner is tied up at the dock and it goes to set sail, if there's even but one rope still tethered to the pier, it's not going to be able to sail off. And it's the same kind of concept, I think, is what you're sharing.
Yeah. No, I hadn't heard that one, but that's good. That's exactly it. And the reason, because we're talking in metaphor and image here, obviously, is that it wasn't real in the first place. This is a transition into authenticity, after all. That's what the threshold's about.
That's right.
It's about compassion. It's about authenticity. It's about heart. It's about a completely new orientation to life.
You go on in the lecture in talking about this threshold. There's a phrase you use that is very poignant. And if you need me to restate to you even just a paragraph in the lecture, let me know. But you go on to talk about humanity sabotaging its own potential. And the sentence that it's contained in, you say, little wonder then that the modern world is filled to the brim with distractions, as humanity sabotages its own potential, its limitless capacities, and suppresses its opportunities for divine fulfillment. And I wanted to ask you if you could expand on this idea of humanity sabotaging its own potential. What do you mean by that?
I've said it before. I think that there's little profit in the activity of spiritual teaching, spiritual mastery, of being an adept. And just look at the last few thousand years of history on religions and spiritual paths. Very highly profound, clear, ways the masters have bent over backwards, really, with parables and imagery and ways of not alienating people who are anything other than, peasants, and appealing to all classes of people, not dependent on mental intelligence, for example, all of that, which is, of course, absolutely how it is, absolutely so. And yet, how many of the, what are we approaching, 8 billion people on the planet at this time, I think, 8 billion people. And in Your Essential Self, my book, I think I referred to, was it 10,000 or something? It was a book that I came across that brought up this idea of a certain number of people that may sort of tilt the collective consciousness, the consciousness raising effort, so to speak, regardless of whether that's true or not. Even a few million is not that many. I think it was a few million, it was more than a few thousand. But you see, a few million isn't that much in 8 billion people. And it's not going to be too long until we double that, of course. Now, how many of those people are disciplined enough to lead a sacred spiritual life or anything approaching it? Really? And the best way to alienate your audience when you're talking about spirituality. I mean, by all means, talk about abundance and relationship and loving contact and a wonderful world and all this kind of thing, but mention for 1 minute the annihilation of the self. Mention for 1 minute reality in the sense that there is no individual separate self, there is merely consciousness. And it is a delusion of the individual self that you stand apart from that consciousness. People are not essentially interested. Couple that with what I think we all know in our humanness very much about, which is inertia, resistance, laziness, that way in which we sort of can't be bothered to keep it up. I mean, if you turn up at a serious spiritual institution, it's a culture shock. The singer Leonard Cohen called the Soto Zen people the commandos of the spiritual world, and it was exactly what I found when I lived in the Zen monastery. I mean, it was from morning to night, every second of my time was looked over and governed and was aligned to the joint awareness of the collective, of the total play. This is ongoing, day after day after day after day, without a break of any sort. It's a wonderful experience to have. We should surely all have it, but then to find a way, and this was so difficult, to bring that discipline back into life. When you have so much license, and you can spend time on the phone talking to people, you can watch a movie, you can read a book, you can do something you want to do. Try a few months of doing nothing that you want to do, not even wearing a piece of clothing that you may want to wear, you see. And when you've been cleaning your teeth for 3 or 4 minutes, to be told that you're indulging by carrying on. And these things bring up the deepest feelings in you. And yet, spirituality is about discipline. Again, not a very attractive concept. So I don't think that we have evolved as a race to a place where we're willing to pay the price for compassion. Not really. And let's hope it changes.
It's interesting you come there with your comments, because 3 or 4 minutes ago you talked about there being about 8 billion people on the planet, and people just aren't interested in spirituality. And my experience, similar, but I'd share it a little differently, is people are far more interested in spirituality than they want to let it be known. And it's out of their own fears, out of their fear of, well, where is this leading me? But on the surface, it's more about the fear of, but what do I have to give up? There's an assumption that I have to give up something. And indeed, there are things you need to give up in this material existence. But then you realize there was nothing you were giving up in the first place. And what you gain far exceeds and can never be measured in this material existence. I observe and am continuously intrigued how people, you see it perhaps by a twinkle in their eye, or with a word they share that's sneaks into the conversation, that is so illuminating of their awareness of, but is shrouded in this fear of, I don't want to go there.
It's a very nice observation. I appreciate it, and I hope it's true of many. That would be lovely. And then the question must come up is, how do you make it more acceptable for them to admit their divine longing?
Well, I think that's where our role as therapists come in, is creating the milieu, creating the space that people can safely come to share that aspect of themselves, to experience that aspect of themselves.
It's why, too, we have to talk about it, isn't it? Why it's good to name it and to say these things and put them somehow into form, although, as I'm sure we must have said before in these interviews, in a sense something you can't talk about, but yet you try. And I think that by introducing these concepts and finding a way to speak of the spiritual vision, perhaps it invites people who are initially reluctant to feel somehow that there is a home for this longing, there's a place for it.
I want to bring this idea of what our role might be as therapists into the conversation as a foyer into my next question. And you talk about traditional psychotherapy and then sacred attention therapy. And is it fair to say that a difference between mainstream psychotherapy and sacred attention therapy is that in mainstream psychotherapy, the therapist peers into and works with the mind to heal the mind? But in sacred attention therapy, the therapist also works with the heart and the soul to heal the mind.
It's very difficult.
I realize that's a very broad, I'm painting a very broad brush there. And we could spend multiple lectures talking about this alone. But is it fair to suggest that in sacred attention therapy there's also a working with and through the heart in the healing of the mind?
Yes, of course, the heart and the soul, and beyond the mind and beyond thought and concepts and even the body. But you see, it's a very difficult time because the third and the fourth wave psychologies, so-called, which are humanistic psychology, which underpins humanistic psychotherapy, and transpersonal psychology and transpersonal psychotherapy, are now increasingly subsumed into the establishment. So whereas 30 years, 40 years ago, it would be very hard, 30, 40 years ago, it would be very, very hard to find humanistic practitioners in the establishment. It is the case. So even transpersonal. So I don't think we can be quite so black and white. We can talk about how sacred attention therapy differs from the waves of psychology and psychotherapy to date, right up to the end of the 20th century. And it does differ. But I wouldn't want to detract from the validity of the expansive therapy that's taking place that may be predicated on humanistic psychology and psychotherapy, certainly transpersonal, breath work, body work, work that has developed through the last 100 years and so, is tremendously sophisticated. I'm with it all the way, in the sense that I think it's fantastic. I will never get to the bottom of it. I don't think in my lifetime. There's so much to look into, there's so much to understand.
Yeah.
There's such a diversity and incredible profundity.
Yeah.
And we have the last 100, 120 years to thank for that, because it didn't happen before. We didn't have this in the 18th century or before, or mid-19th century even. There was this extraordinary time of transition of the 19th into the 20th century, which was extraordinary both psychologically and spiritually. I don't know what it could have been like to live in that time, but it was exceptional. There was another exceptional time, which was, can we still say, I would have to say 500 BCE, what we used to call BC, and 2,000 years ago, in which the world religions were all founded. More or less, all of them were founded, or the great majority of them were founded then. Isn't that extraordinary? And no coincidence somehow. So there seems to be these incredible moments in time, extended moments in time, where things change. I think something of that sort wants to happen now. It doesn't appear to be happening, because this seems to be a time of superficiality and cheapening. And I don't say that with any gloatingness or anything. It doesn't make me happy at all to say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it seems to me there's a demand of this time. There's a challenge.
Yeah. I think the illusions of the world are becoming more and more apparent.
Well put. Yeah.
And even those who are embroiled in the illusion are starting to look at it a different way and realizing that it's not going to be able to continue on this way. But they just don't know where to go with it. I don't want to get off topic and start to diverge, because the illusions of the world is a favorite topic of mine. But as we move towards the end of the lecture, you speak of 3 things to keep in mind when crossing the void from the first to the second stage of awakening. Now, your second point, and if I need to talk what the first and the third point was, let me know. But your second point is that we must be totally present. Is this also about acceptance and surrender to life? Is it also about trust and faith that life has your back?
Yeah, in a word, of course, I think it is, yeah. Let's just unpack that word presence, really, being present. It's, in the sense I think we have to use it in relationship to the threshold of transformation, it is a kind of emptiness. It is an emptiness of receptivity. It is a availableness to life, shall we say. And so just bear in mind that one can feel present along the way, and increasingly present in much the same relative way as if you're, if you're on a long trek and you have a backpack on, you take the thing off and you suddenly feel, this great relief, and your shoulders can relax and maybe you feel a bit springy and all of that. Presence can be like that along the way. But the presence that is necessary in the crossing of the threshold is total. I nearly said absolute, but it's not correct. It's total. It means that you are, as they might say in the East, as the hollow bamboo. You let it come through you, let it play on you. And I think we do well to distinguish between the totality of something, a sense of total presence, which is no longer, to go back to the interview of last time, part of the seeking. It's no longer something that's cumulative or progressing towards some state. It just is. And of course, once you settle into that state of presence, there is the absurdity that all of the accumulation actually has no relationship to it. It was necessary, as was all of the divesting of the robes of personality and character necessary. But it wasn't authentic. It wasn't real.
Want to end the interview with a discussion about how you end the lecture. We're very near the end. And there's this sentence I'm going to quote to you, and I can remember I heard it for the first time, and it was one of those things that made me stop and think, and I still think about it. You share that, quote, "The threshold of transformation, or the state of authenticity, brings us to perhaps 10 to 15% of the total potential and capacity of the human being." 10 to 15%, maybe. Now, this is not the first time I've heard this kind of sharing, although not with those words specifically. Now, this statement, it could be both discouraging and invigorating, or even hopeful or inspiring. How would you intend for the seeker to perceive this statement? And what is the seeker to do with this insight?
I think the word is humility, isn't it? I think be humble. Try and let go of notions of progress. They certainly don't help. Other than possibly for certain kinds of individuals, right at the outset of inner work, the idea of making progress or accumulating, of course, is antithetical to inner work, where actually what you're doing is letting go. You're dropping, you're allowing, you're relinquishing all the time. If there's any progress in it, mark it up to that. But, progress is a dumb concept in relationship to inner work. And so something like this idea that to say in the advanced stages and even beyond the threshold into the second stage, one is still merely just a fraction of oneself as a human being. I think that's right. I think that's correct in the sense that the end of the first stage of awakening is, of course, the beginning of the second. And you begin there from the kindergarten end, so to say, really. And so you should, in a way, even it's supra-kindergarten, because you have nothing. That you wouldn't have made it across otherwise. You wouldn't have been buoyant and light enough to have made the crossing. So I think the message in it, not that I remember thinking it through and thinking, what could this instill in anybody, but one just tries to tell the truth, is be humble in your work at whatever stage you perceive yourself to be in and whatever level of attainment. You will need more and more and more and more of it. So cultivate humility. Cultivate humility.
It's interesting because those who may be familiar with your three-stage model, and I offer this as a reminder to people who are, or to those who may not be familiar with the three-stage model, as we talked about here, crossing the threshold from stage 1 to stage 2, you may touch 10 to 15% of your total potential. But it's only when you cross from into stage 2 into 3 that you're really, in your model, you're really preparing for that spiritual life.
Yes.
So more humbleness for us to consider when, at least I can only speak for myself, I know how much work it feels is involved in just going from stage 1 to even get to stage 2. A tremendous amount of work.
Which is why one of moving ahead, way ahead now into stage 3, and one of the crucial aspects of practice, and of course insight and being at that stage is that one isn't attached in any way to one's actions, to one's industry, to one's enterprise, to anything that you do. You are merely present in a state of being without attachments to anything that you do. So it's the big lesson, it's one of the big signs of the third stage of enlightenment and stage of awakening, and not enlightenment, awakening. And there, since you will live that along the way, it's a good thing to keep in mind. And it's something you can practice, of course, actually practice consciously at any stage. Do whatever you're doing in the moment, in a state of presence, without any attachment to where that's leading, where it's going.
I think that's a good place to leave this lecture and this series, because this was the last of the Panchavati Discourses. And when we come together the next time, we will begin, I think, our third series, the Silent Thunder Discourses. And when we come together to discuss those, we will talk about the series as a whole and the lectures contained there within. So I look forward to beginning that the next time we come together.
As do I.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye-bye.